Language debates in Canada often centre around English and French. But long before those were the official languages of Canada, Indigenous languages thrived here. With us now on what happened to those languages, and particularly on efforts to revive some that have nearly been lost, we're joined by Ryan DeCaire. He is Associate Professor at the University of Toronto's Centre for Indigenous Studies and Department of Linguistics, and a Mohawk language teacher. Ryan, it's good to see you again.
Pleasure.
You and I first met, it's got to be more than 10 years ago. You were a university student.
That's right.
And you spoke some Mohawk for us.
That's right, yeah.
Would you introduce yourself in the Mohawk language?
Sure. Wat gunung horado ze wagwegum. Ryan yunjats wachta ni de wagen. Ganya gehaga na jatoda. The new ways is going eges.
Did you just say what I just said? But
close enough. I said welcome. It's great to be here, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Yeah. Take us back more than a century ago. There were efforts in this country made to suppress Indigenous languages from being spoken.
That's right.
How successful were those efforts?
They were quite successful, but like that, when we think about how negative it was, there was also positives right at the beginning. When you look at the first superintendent of Indigenous affairs, he spoke Mohawk language quite proficiently. And from there, it developed a good relationship with Indigenous people. But then we noticed suppression that aligned with taking over land bases and trying to acquire resources to really fuel development in the New World and also back in Europe.
So tell us how it worked. How did they try to suppress Indigenous languages a century ago?
Well, at first taking away lands, pushing Indigenous people off onto reserves, and then up until more recently, the residential school system, which quite a few people are now quite familiar with, especially since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. So you can go from, say, pushing people away off their lands. We even call the President of the United States in Mohawk Ranadagarias, and that means a town destroyer, because he created a military campaign to push our people away from our villages and lay waste to them and set them on fire and burn our corn.
Was this Andrew Jackson, or which president was that?
No, that was the first president of the United States, yeah.
George Washington.
Yeah, George
Okay.
Washington, yeah. And that called that the Sullivan Campaign. So you can go all the way back to then also to more recently in the 1900s, which is residential schools, and then 60s scoop. And residential schools especially were quite devastating in the early 1900s, probably 1920s to 1950s, where that would be people of my grandparent generation. They were sent there quite forcibly to only speak English. And it wasn't just about taking kids away from their communities to only speak English. They humiliated them. Right? They punished them. They would put pins in their tongues whenever they spoke their language, to the point where it created this attitude around Indigenous languages in Indigenous communities that they were inferior, that they were wrong, that they were bad.
Well, we have some stats on this that we want to share with our viewers and listeners right now. This is from Stats Canada. Today, there are more than 70 Indigenous languages spoken in more than 600 First Nations, 50 Inuit communities, and a variety of Métis groups. The most common are Cree and Inuktitut. In Ontario, it's Ojibwe. A number of these languages have fewer than 1,000 speakers, and one has only 210 speakers.
That's right.
Only 210 people who know this language anymore. Yep. The number of people identifying as Indigenous has grown almost twice as fast as the non-Indigenous population in Canada. It's now 1.8 million, or 5% of the population, and yet, in the last 5 years, the number of Indigenous people who could hold a conversation in an Indigenous language, despite that population growth, the number has actually dropped by 4.3%. The number of Indigenous people who could speak an Indigenous language that wasn't their mother tongue grew by 7%, so there are more people learning these languages as a second language. However, there was also an 8% drop in the number of Indigenous people whose first language learned during childhood was Indigenous.
That's right.
So that's the lay of the land right now. There is a massive generation gap in knowledge when it comes to Indigenous languages. What does that look like on the ground?
Well, you're right. The best languages for vitality are Inuktitut and Cree, and some of those languages, such as Inuktitut, 80% of people can speak it. But then most other Indigenous languages, largely, almost all of them, yes, maybe 2%. If you're lucky for some, 2%. And then that 2%, the people who can speak it to a high level are 60 and older, right? So what you have is this parent generation of people who cannot speak it and they can't pass it on to their children. And that's where you really notice an increase in language vitality, is when there's intergenerational transmission from parents down to children.
Did your parents speak it?
No.
So how do you know it so well?
Because I had to take the time to be around first language speakers, to actually acquire the language to a high enough proficiency to speak it as a primary language. And that took me over 3,000 hours of work.
And why did you want to do that?
Because it's the language of my people where I grew up, right? It's because I know that that language is distinct and it brings me happiness, and I know that it's going to bring my community happiness to be connected with who they are, their history, and their future.
You say it took 3,000 hours to learn that, and I want to pick up on that because, and I don't know if these comparisons make any sense, so you'll forgive me here if this is off base, but you know, if you're English, it's not a long journey necessarily to learn French or Italian or Spanish. They're all Romance languages. They have some things in common. Same as, you know, Hebrew and Arabic, they have a lot of things in common.
That's right.
What about Indigenous languages? Do they have anything in common with other languages that would therefore, where you could say, I know how to speak X language, therefore learning Mohawk is not that tough?
It's very similar to the European situation, where we have language families in Canada and the United States, where there exist a number of languages within that family that are related, right? So if you know one of them, your ability to learn the next one is going to be a lot easier. However, if your first language is English, which is the primary language of most Indigenous people in Canada, to learn an Indigenous language is way harder to learn an Indigenous language than, say, learning French, right, or Spanish, because it's of a completely different language family. The structure is totally different. So if, say, I, as a first language English speaker, want to become a French language speaker, there is research now put out that has determined that it takes around 700 hours to become a highly proficient French speaker or Spanish speaker if your first language is English. However, if you want to become a highly proficient speaker of Mohawk or Ojibwe or Inuktitut, it requires at least 3,000 hours.
So more than 4 times as much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, look at that big board there.
Yeah.
It's the same alphabet, right? Same alphabet?
Yeah, it's based on the Roman alphabet.
Pretty much the same alphabet?
Very similar.
Okay, so it's not like then trying to learn Hebrew or Arabic, which is a completely different language.
That's right.
And it's left to right, unlike Hebrew, which is right to left.
Yep.
So we have that much in common.
That's definitely a benefit.
So where's the trick? Why is it 4 times harder to learn Mohawk than it would be to learn French?
Well, because when you look at the different structural properties, say, of English versus Mohawk, Mohawk is what is designated as a polysynthetic language, which means that it's comprised of many different morphemes that you have to learn how to attach all these morphemes to create one word.
Morpheme?
Morpheme is like one part of a word, right? One part of a word. And then when you put those all together, it forms a sentence. So when you look at English, there's unlimited sentences in English. In Mohawk, one word is a sentence. So that means there's unlimited words in Mohawk, and you have to learn how to put all these little pieces together to create one word. And that's what really signifies it as being a different way to think about this world. And then, even though the orthography, how it's written, might be similar, what the number one barrier isn't really the structural properties, it's access to its use, right? Curriculum, hearing people, being around the language, having the ability to go speak it with people, and that's really the number one challenge.
I have certainly spoken to Indigenous people about this in the past, about the issue of 2 official languages in Canada, English and French. Where do Indigenous people see themselves in that narrative?
Well, Indigenous people existed here long before French and English languages arrived here. So I don't understand why anybody wouldn't see how it would be important for them to also be official.
So there is a certain offense taken that the notion that we have 2 official languages in the country.
That's definitely true, especially for people who feel that we should play a strong role in the Canadian politic. Although there are people that really feel that we shouldn't get caught up in that issue between French and English, because we often get tossed in between this debate over French and English use, and we'd rather be focusing more on how do we create a primary speaking community within our own communities. Yeah.
Do you have some empathy or simpatico with French-speaking people in the country who see their language as being under threat and who, as we've seen in the province of Quebec, have taken some extraordinary measures, some people think illegal measures, in order to protect the French language? Do you have some simpatico for that?
100%. And I think most Indigenous people do. Because when you look at the French situation, they are a minority language relative to English, and English is the dominating language. And if you do not set up structures to try and thwart any kind of further decline of its use, when English is so powerful, you are going to see its demise over time. But when you compare that with the Indigenous language situation, we understand it far more strongly in the sense that French has never been endangered in Quebec. It's never been even close to endangered.
They would disagree, but anyway. I mean,
yes, depending on you define endangered.
Endangered, right.
And endangered meaning that it's likely not to be passed on to a new generation and that only grandparents are speaking it today, which is not even anywhere close. Not to mention that you can go across the great waters to France where millions of people continue to speak it. We don't have that. This is our home. This is where it always has existed. So that's where the animosity or the challenge comes when you're trying to protect French language, but in so doing, you're also marginalizing Indigenous languages that have existed here far longer than French and English.
Mary Simon, of course,
Yep.
first Indigenous Governor General in Canadian history. She can speak English.
Yes.
She can speak Inuktitut.
That's right.
She can't speak French, one of the so-called official languages of the country. When she was appointed, there were apparently more than 1,000 complaints received by the federal government because of her inability to speak French.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I'll ask, wouldn't it be, like when you think about that, wouldn't it be nice if those letters were sent to congratulate her for being able to speak an Indigenous language? I wonder if there's any letters. I imagine there's not. And how amazing that would be for people to celebrate her, that she can do that, and to really show it that that's a part of what it is to be here in these lands that we call Canada, and to question themselves and ask, why don't I speak an Indigenous language too? What's the history behind that? And instead of putting us in between English and French and saying, oh, she, maybe that she wouldn't be there if she only spoke French in an Indigenous language. That's what some people are saying.
Yeah.
And instead of concentrating on that, why don't we concentrate on what can we do to support Indigenous languages to ensure that they're going to be have strong vitality in the future?
Okay, I'm now going to do the very thing you've just
Sure.
accused me
Yes.
of people of doing,
Yep.
which is, can you appreciate how unhappy Francophones must be that the Governor General of the country can't speak one of the country's, again, so-called official languages?
Sure. Yeah, I could appreciate that. At the same time, I would also like for them to have a stronger understanding of support of the situation of Indigenous languages.
Understood. If you are a public servant working for the federal government of this country,
Sure.
and you can speak French and English fluently,
Yep.
it's a real asset for you. In fact, it's a financial asset for you because they'll give you $800 a year as a bonus if you can speak both official
Right.
languages. If you can speak English and Inuktitut or French and Ojibwe, there's no bonus.
Not
What do you think of that?
It's not surprising. One, that's not enshrined in any law for an Indigenous language to get a bonus. This is something that the Indigenous Languages Act should promote, to put Indigenous languages on equal footing with English and French. However, even if we did get that, that assumes that one, Indigenous people want to work for the federal government. A large majority likely don't want to. They want to work in their own communities to promote their own language. Two, it's somewhat of a distraction in the sense that that kind of money isn't really going to support Indigenous languages where they need to be supported for revitalization to truly occur. And if you look, say, for example, to our nearest neighbors in the United States with an Indigenous languages that has been successful at revitalization is the Hawaiian language. So what did they do to support the Hawaiian language? Teachers who become proficient speakers of Hawaiian and become teachers of Hawaiian, they get an $8,000 bonus every year. So compare 8,000 to 800. And why is that? It's because they notice that Hawaiian is struggling and that they need the extra added support to ensure that they're going to be creating speakers in the future.
So there's some real incentive there.
Oh, and there needs to be. Right.
Okay, so put it in the Canadian context. What should we do to ensure that Indigenous languages not just survive, but thrive in the future?
Well, there's two things we need to consider. We need to consider top-down strategies and bottom-up strategies, and a multi-pronged strategy. At first, we do need to guarantee the rights of Indigenous people to have full education in their languages, which is not guaranteed under Official Languages Act or the Indigenous Languages Act, to have somewhat equal rights as do French and do English.
So you want a law that says that?
Yes,
Okay.
and to garner the same financial resources to actually make that happen. That includes teacher training, actually training people to become highly proficient speakers of those languages, and all the infrastructure that goes with it. So there's that. However, the most important thing is to ensure that all that money, all that financial resources go to the best practices for creating speakers of our languages.
How much money goes to that right now?
I can't give you an accurate number, but far less than goes into implementing official languages policy. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And if we really look at what are the best practices, what we're seeing now is because there's been a big cut between the intergenerational transmission of our languages, the parent generation, the young adults, need to become highly proficient in order to teach to their children. So we're seeing that what we're calling adult immersion programs, which is putting adults in a full immersion program for 2 to 3 years, with it's their only responsibility to learn the language, so they can learn the language to a high enough level to recreate a peer group of use within their community, so then they can then pass it on to their new children. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing second language learners who become highly proficient, who are now recreating first language speaking children within the home. And that's one indicator that the language is doing well or coming back to life, is when you see it going back to the children.
Is that a top-down solution or a bottom-up solution?
That's definitely a mix of it, but it's more bottom-up, because it's really the grassroots people who are working hard to make that happen. Yeah. But they can't do it without top-down support from the government, which we don't have.
How many people in your typical daily life,
Sure.
How many people can you talk Mohawk to?
I can talk, oh, you mean on just an average day?
Yeah.
Well, what you have to do when you speak these languages is you have to set up your life around being around other people who speak the language. So you have to be around everybody who does, so you structure your life around that. Some people will call that a sacrifice. I wouldn't, because it's a delight to be around those people. But today, Mohawk, there's probably around between 600 and 1,000 people who speak it, probably closer to 600.
In the province or country or what?
In the world.
In
That's
the
it.
world?
In the world. So if you speak Mohawk, you're likely to know most Mohawk people who speak the language. Yeah. Yeah. I know, it's quite incredible, right?
You've got a tall task ahead of you if you want to get that language
Yeah,
more
not just
broadly
me.
spoken.
There's a lot of us doing great work, better than me, and I'm really happy that they're doing that. Yeah, yeah, you got that right.
If we have this, I mentioned at the top, we spoke 10 years ago.
Sure.
If we speak 10 years from now, what are things going to be like?
I'd like to see more children speaking it as a first language, but we need the support from the federal government to garner enough financial resources to put it where really the most effective programs are. And I'd like to see people identifying through use of the language as a primary language within Indigenous communities. And I don't think that's too far-fetched, because we can create highly proficient speakers within 2 to 3 years. So if we have the resources, if we have the support to do that, you'd be amazed how much we can do, considering how much we've done with virtually no resources for the last 50, 60, 70 years, and it's still existing. So you know that the heart is there. People are going to do it without the money. However, we'd like to see enough money that went into destroying our languages to actually revitalizing them in order for things like really to heal the relationships that Indigenous people have with Canada.
That's Ryan DeCaire, Associate Professor, Centre for Indigenous Studies in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Toronto. Would you like to say goodbye in Mohawk to us? Thank you, Ryan. Really a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.